So this question is, what are the best crops for nitrogen fixation? Best cover crops for nitrogen fixation. I mean, obviously it's going to be legumes, and there's a lot of different types of legumes. If you're doing, there's a question later about what's the best cover crop after wheat. If you're doing wheat or anything else that's harvested in the summertime, you've got a lot of choices. There's cowpeas and sun hemp and soybeans and mung beans. There's lots of choices if you're planting this cover crop in July, August type time frame. If you're coming in later after a corn or soybean crop or silage or something like this, where you're not getting it planted till, mid-September, October, then your choices get a lot more limited because obviously those warm season things like a cowpea are going to die with the first frost. That's not going to be worth the money if it only grows for a few weeks. So now you're looking at things that can survive cold weather. So you're looking at probably hairy vetch is going to be the number one most widely used cold hardy legume to produce nitrogen. Winter peas would be another option. They're a little bit more difficult because they need to be planted deeper in order to overwinter. But the biggest thing is you can select the right species and you can get the right seeding rate. You can get all these things right. But if you're not willing to let it grow in the spring in order to produce that nitrogen that you're counting on, I tell people don't spend very much money on legume cover crops unless you've got enough patience to let it grow into the spring. And let me show you what I mean here. So this is some work that we did. We've done this for the last couple of years. This happens to be data from just this past spring. So this was all cover crops that were planted in around the first week in October in 2021. So we harvested soybeans. We came in and we planted these plots, and you can see we had a couple different combinations of rye, vetch, rye and peas. We had monoculture barley, triticale, different seeding rates of rye, and then we had just some straight hairy vetch as well. So we planted all these different things out there, and then we came out and we started doing the biomass samples, or we took the clippings, like I was telling you, one yard square clippings. And then we sent them into the lab to be analyzed. We started May 5th, and then we did it every week thereafter for 5 weeks. So the 5th, the 12th, the 20th, 26th, and then June 2nd. And this chart here shows the amount of biomass accumulation from these plots. And so the blue bar is what we measured May 5th. So if you look at the first one, and this is a mix of 30 pounds of rye and 15 pounds of vetch, that first week when we sampled it, it was just under a ton. And this is dry matter basis. So we sent it into the lab. They cook all the water out of it and then weigh what's left just to see how much it actually was. So less than 1 ton, you go forward a week and it, was up to about 1 1/3 tons. And I don't know what the weather was like there in Indiana, but we had a really cold snap about that middle of May, and you'll see almost all of these. I got almost no growth that second week of May, and some springs are like that. Other times we just see a big shoot up of biomass, but very little accumulation in that week because it was cold. In fact, we had some crops freeze. We had some corn that got burnt back with frost. Warmed up again between May 20th and May 26th there. It really jumped up. And so, that one we're seeing almost 2.5 tons. But then look at how much in 1 week's time between May 26th and June 2nd, it went from about 2.5 tons to over 4 tons of biomass in that 1 week. And that just shows you, if you're willing to wait, you're going to get tremendous amount of growth on that tail end of that season. And it's all about heat units. If we would have had a much warmer spring, these charts would have definitely been shifted, and I would have had that 4 tons, probably by May 20th. And some years are going to be like that, and some years are going to be like this, where we don't see that until June 2nd. If you look kind of towards the middle there, the 80 pounds of Elbon rye, definitely more biomass early on. So if you look at that, by May 5th, that Elbon had over 2 tons of biomass. Because I only had 30 pounds of rye in this mix, the vetch wasn't hardly contributing anything early on. But by the end, the mix actually had more biomass than just the straight rye, which is kind of exciting. If you look clear over to the right, the AU Merit hairy vetch and the Oregon, well, the AU Merit, I guess, is the one that we tested. We didn't even pull a sample on this May 5th because there wasn't anything out there to sample. There wasn't enough to physically clip and send into the lab because vetch is just a little slower getting going. By the 12th, we had accumulated about 800 pounds, didn't get much that next week, had a decent amount of growth that we measured May 26th. But then, the big jump again came that last week of May. And so as we give it more time to grow, we get more benefits. And then here's what the nitrogen pounds per acre looks like. And this is what's really interesting and is kind of exciting. So again, the same crops, the same testing cadence here, starting the first week in May and going through the first week of June. You see the nitrogen accumulation here with the rye and the vetch. And again, look at the amount of nitrogen. You can tell this is where the vetch kicked in, that between May 20th and May 26th, the vetch finally started growing. And we went from about 60 pounds of nitrogen to about 130. So it doubled the amount of nitrogen in that week. I'm not exactly sure why it came back down that next week. It's probably because the rye really took off and kind of started smothering the vetch out. But we didn't get the majority of our nitrogen production until it warmed up. And then again, if you look at the AU Merit hairy vetch, I had about 70 pounds of nitrogen May 12th, really didn't do anything that next week. It almost doubled. It went to about 160 by May 26th. And then by the time we roll around to the first week of June, we're up to almost 200 pounds. So you just have to be patient if you're going to put these legumes out there. Can you grow 200 pounds of nitrogen for a corn crop? Yes, you can if you're patient and willing to wait. And you're not going to get all this. It's going to take time to cycle. I was telling you about the carbon nitrogen ratio. So the 30 pounds of rye and 15 pounds of vetch, the C to N ratio of that is probably going to be around that 20 to 22 to 1. So it'll cycle out, but it'll take a little bit of time. The hairy vetch by itself is about 14 to 15 carbon nitrogen ratio. And so it's going to cycle pretty quickly. These samples where it was rye by itself, it was up over 30 to 1. So again, the nitrogen that's in here, and it's still showing that, even with where I didn't have any legumes, my soil is healthy enough. It's releasing about 60 pounds of nitrogen just with cereal rye. But I'm not going to get that back for my next crop until later in the season because it's just straight rye.